There is a misnomer and an error in thinking we have a limited enumerated powered government. Let's just take one power, interstate commerce. It's the means that needs to be enumerated and not the power, because a power with unlimited means is unlimited government.
That's beautiful. I'm glad you brought that up. And since you brought that up, I get to talk about one of my favorite topics. My staff doesn't usually just love it when I talk about the Commerce Clause because they're afraid I'll go, well, I think the term they use is law geek. But I'll try not to go too law geek on this one and focus just on the big picture. Since 1937, the Supreme Court has been allowing Congress to get away with almost anything it wants, all in the name of regulating interstate commerce, referring to Clause 3 of Article 1, Section 8, the power to regulate commerce between the states, among the Indian tribes, and with foreign nations. It was intended really as a trade restriction power, a power to Congress to make sure at a minimum that the states didn't engage in economic warfare against each other, imposing high tariffs against each other and so forth. It does mean, I think, that Congress has the power to regulate things like interstate airways, airwaves, waterways, channels and instrumentalities of commerce, and probably commercial transactions between one state and another. But since 1937, the Supreme Court is saying that Congress may, without any interference from the courts, regulate any and every activity, in effect, that when measured in the aggregate, when replicated across every state, substantially affects interstate commerce. That's legalese. It's sort of the fine print language you see at the bottom of the contract that you don't want to read. It's legalese for a fairly simple concept, which is Congress can do almost anything it wants. That is a problem. The way we fix that problem may be ultimately involving the courts, but it has to rely on the political branches. It has to rely on members of Congress reining in their own power, deciding that they're not going to exercise powers just because the Supreme Court said they can get away with it. There's a big difference, you see, between adhering to the letter and spirit of the Constitution on the one hand, and on the other hand, doing whatever you can get away with in court. In other words, the fact that I didn't get a ticket while driving here today doesn't necessarily mean that I obeyed the law. I did, Sheriff, I promise. If I had been speeding, the fact that I didn't get a ticket wouldn't mean that I obeyed the law. It would just mean that I didn't get caught. We've got a Congress that since 1937 has seen this light under the Commerce Clause as being always green, because on only 2 instances since 1937 has the Supreme Court said that Congress has exceeded its power under the Commerce Clause. Well, we're about to raise that score to 3. I watched the Supreme Court's arguments last week. The conservative cause, the cause for liberty, is, I believe, going to prevail. We'll get there little by little, election by election, but we have to start voting differently. We have to start voting in people who will restrain their own power and not wait for the courts to restrain